and greetings from Chicagoland. I'm Munira Zahabi, the niche navigator, and welcome to Munira's Musings. I'm your host, podcaster, author, coach, and international speaker. Each week, I bring you insightful conversations with extraordinary individuals who share their unique perspectives and stories. Join me on this captivating journey as we explore new ideas and inspirations. Now, let's dive into today's episode with our special guest.
Greetings from Chicagoland. Welcome to Munira's Musings, another episode with a guest all the way from Canada. Welcome, Carl Richards.
Thank you, Munira. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me here.
You are most welcome. So Carl here is a podcaster, a TEDx speaker, and somebody who had difficulty speaking before. But let's hear his story. Before we do that, let's talk to our listeners. Thank you and welcome to Munira's Musings. Thank you for joining us. We would like for us to share our stories so that you all can jump into the entrepreneurial sea with us. Entrepreneurship, as you know, is not easy, but it is fun. So go ahead and tell us your story, Carl. Tell us a little bit about your story, about yourself.
Well, thanks, Munira. You alluded to the fact I used to stutter when I was younger, and I did. I stuttered horribly when I was a kid, and I had to go to speech therapy at the age of 12. It was that bad. And it's actually in speech therapy where I learned a very valuable tool. And it's the tool that a lot of people who've been to speech therapy or have overcome stuttering have probably been through as well. And it's the only person in control of your speech is you. The only person in control of your speech is you. And I've carried this with me my entire life because as I grew up, as I became a teenager and was deciding what I wanted to do when I became an adult, I'm still trying to figure out when I'm going to become an adult, by the way. But I figured out that with my chosen career path, be it media, be it somewhere in the entertainment world, that I was in control of my speaking. I was in control of my presentation, how I came across to the world. The only person that's in control of that is you. That's a very powerful tool especially when you're in the entrepreneurial space and you want to build a business, you want to expand, you want to grow, you want to put yourself out there and be seen as the go-to expert. The only person who's in control of the narrative is you. That's pretty powerful. The second thing I learned when I was starting out my career as a broadcaster, which by the way, I spent 25 years doing it. The second thing I learned from a fairly younger age, and I would say in my early 20s, from a mentor, was the audience doesn't know what you don't tell them. I think as entrepreneurs, especially when we're speaking in front of networking groups or even on larger stages, we feel we have to tell absolutely every single piece of our life, what we ate for breakfast, what color our socks are. It's stuff that we don't need to know, right? But the audience doesn't know what you don't tell them means that you need to tell them what they need to hear so they know that you can, so they know that they can trust you. It's developing that know, like, and trust factor, but they don't need to know absolutely every single thing. So when you put those two together, the only person who's in control of your speaking or your speech is you, and the audience doesn't know what you don't tell them. That's an amazing combination for growth as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, even as a person, who's navigating other challenges in job situations or family or relationships. Those are two very powerful pieces that I take with me every single where I go. It's not that I'm lying to people by not telling them everything about me, but they don't need to know what kind of shampoo I use. Okay, I don't use shampoo, admittedly, but they don't need to know that, right? There's things about you that they don't need to know. They need to know enough so they can say, is this person the real deal? Is Munira the real individual that I want to connect with and network, partner, joint venture, do business with? Is Munira the real deal? That's what's most important. And that's what I think people are looking for, at least from a business perspective, even from a personal perspective. And obviously your family might know you a little differently. I hope they do than the business world. But again, when you put those two things together, it's a recipe for success in speaking, in podcasting, and I believe in business in general.
Perfect. So let's start with what you started with. I didn't want to bring this up, but you did. You said stutter. Was that something you were born with?
You know what, Munira, I don't know if people are born with stuttering. I think there's probably something neurological that does happen. I'm not a speech therapist. I did spend time as a speaker trainer, but not a speech therapist or a speech pathologist. But I believe that at some point there was either a traumatic experience that happened in my life, or as I was developing, my brain was moving faster than my mouth or something. What I understand is when it comes to stuttering is sometimes the person who's stuttering is trying to block a stutter, because the reality is everybody stutters, everybody stammers, everybody stutters. We've heard it when people get caught, or they're asked a question and they don't quite know how to answer it, and they stammer and they stutter. But what a stutterer is trying to do, or a person who's labeled a stutterer, they're trying to block the stutter. So they might stammer a little bit more, they might contort their face. Every stutterer has different ways in which they try and block it, because they don't want to make a mistake. They want their speech to be perfect, not realizing that speech was never designed to be perfect. And even the most skilled presenters make mistakes, stammers, stutters, things that we don't notice them, but a stutterer is trying to perfect it. So I think my speech therapist, he referred to it as, we shouldn't be called stutterers, we should be called blockers, because we're trying to block the stutter. So what the speech therapy did was basically gave us permission to stutter, and we'll work our way through things, just like I demonstrated, but with confidence, and not feel the anxiety or the fear that's associated with making a mistake. Because I think one of the challenges is where it's ingrained in our brains from a very young age, at least it was when I was younger, if you make a mistake, that's bad. There's consequences when you do something bad. You know, there's punishment, there's you fail, there's all of those things. And even in speaking, I think it was grade 5, I'm trying to remember, grade 4 or grade 5, I got a D in speaking. D was bad, right? Munira, I don't know if you...
Yeah. D was bad.
D was
C
bad.
was bad.
C was you're just squeaking by. But if you got a D, oh my goodness, that was like parents were like sitting you down going, why are you getting a D?
Yep.
Right?
So
to get a D in speaking, it was that itself was a traumatic experience. But that's what I think my parents realized, that we have to put this kid through, because I would have been like 11 or 10 or 11, then 12 by the time he hit speech therapy. They realized that we have to do this to help him, or otherwise he's not going to be able to function at all in life from a communication standpoint.
So your speech therapist was so good that you went into communications and broadcasting right out of college, right? How does that even happen? And what did you do in that career? Like, were you presenting in front of a TV? What were you doing?
So so my original path was, I originally wanted to be an actor, but for every actor that makes it, there's 10,000 who are working the drive-through asking if you want fries with that, right? So I recognized fairly early on that the next best step for me was to get into radio broadcasting. I loved radio. I grew up at a time when it was the early 80s. Radio was very exciting. A lot of characters. You listen to the DJs on the radio. They're having fun. And I thought, okay, well, they're basically acting on the radio, right? That's what they're doing. I thought, okay, well, if I can't be an actor right away, why don't I do what a number of other individuals have done, and that's start by going into broadcasting. A lot of successful people, Alex Trebek, Lauren Green, going back years, Ryan Seacrest, all of these people have started out in broadcasting and then gone into other areas of entertainment, be it television or even into movies and things like that. So the step into radio was, and I did love radio. So I certainly had developed and continued to develop through certain things that I was doing. I was involved in some smaller theater type productions in later elementary school, and then into high school I was in concert band. Not that you're speaking or doing things like that in that, but it's about performance, right? And when you're playing an instrument and you're given a solo, guess what? It's your moment to shine. You need to be confident. So I think it's a number of those things put together that made it fairly seamless to get into broadcasting at around the age of 18, 19, where I figured that, communications was something that, and I didn't even realize it was communications. I didn't know it was that. I just knew it was radio. And radio was, as I said, radio was fun. Radio was, as I found out, radio was theater of the mind. You had television, that was the pictures, but radio was the painting the picture in your mind through sound effects and dialogue and narrative. That we still hear that today, but back then you heard it a lot. You heard a lot of narrative.
And they had all these sound effects too, right? And I remember sitting around the radio on a Saturday afternoon, just listening to this guy just narrating a story. And then they would have the wind gushing, and it's like, how do they even do that? The wind is gushing, then the footsteps of a person walking. But then when you looked at the earlier production on TV, there was a person literally doing all of that stuff while the person was narrating. I mean, that was such an amazing moment, because you weren't seeing the picture. You were allowed to create the pictures in your mind.
Oh, it was phenomenal. I remember when I was a kid, my family would vacation in a small touristy type town called Wellington, Ontario. Great cottage community, phenomenal place. But there's no local television station, and none of these cottages, and we're talking cottages, not like cottages today where sometimes the summer home is better than your home, right? We're talking cottages that are rustic. It's where all your old dishes and the flip down toaster, all stuff that you're probably going to throw away ends up in the cottage. So my family would rent a cottage pretty much every summer, and no television. We're talking early 80s. Television existed, but there was no television in the cottage. But they had a radio. And the radio picked up signals from the United States and upstate New York. I believe Rochester had a radio station. And on Saturday nights, it would air old-time radio shows from the 1930s.
Right.
And I found it fascinating to sit there listening to the radio and the music that would be, you like you say, you hear the footsteps, and I didn't know that all of this was done by people. That came later when I actually figured out, there was theater of the mind. But I found it fascinating. I thought, and probably as a kid, not only fascinated by it, but thinking, man, this sounds fun. Fun, maybe not the storyline, but certainly because some of it was, murder mysteries and things like that. But it was fascinating, and even to go back and listen to them now. Because I think you can, there's an app for everything now. You can listen to some of those old radio shows just by listening to an app or listening on satellite radio. And it's fascinating to hear this was how people were entertained. It was either radio or go to the movies. That's how people were entertained. There was no television, or if there was like 3 people in the world had a television, and they were the most wealthiest people on the planet, right? So people would literally, as you described it, sit around the radio and listen to it. That's what we did. But that's what led me to one of the things that I think that led me to broadcasting, that led me to communications. I had a phenomenal 25-year career. I loved what I did. Yeah, it was a great opportunity.
And now you are a podcaster. So from radio to podcaster, still communications, a different lane in communications. But how does that happen?
Oh my goodness. So they say you haven't made it in radio until you've been fired from at least one job. Well, I was fired twice, so I guess I must be a superstar. Right. In broadcasting, everyone wants to be that big time radio DJ in New York City or LA, but they don't start out that way. Even guys like Howard Stern and Ryan Seacrest, they didn't start out at these big time radio stations. They started small. So I was literally like WKRP in Cincinnati, town to town, up and down the dial. I got fired from my first radio job in 2010 through no fault of my own, corporate restructuring, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. So at that point, I was looking to reinvent myself. I had a number of part-time gigs that I was working on in marketing, which was okay. I didn't mind it. But somebody said, why don't you become a speaker trainer, speech coach? You're in Toastmasters. I was in Toastmasters. You're good at evaluations. You're good at speaking. It only made sense. So I started a part-time business as a speaker trainer, and with the full intention of taking it full-time. But then the radio bug got back in. I was given the opportunity to get back on the radio. Radio is like a narcotic. Once it's in your veins, it's hard to get it out. So I kept working in radio, and I loved it. Still with this part-time speaker training gig on the side, by the way, that I was still intending to take it full-time. And I remember having the discussion with my spouse saying, how much money do I need to make before I can go full-time in my business? And I remember it was a very small number, like 20,000. I never hit that mark. But what happened was it gave me the opportunity to not only get on stages, but then I started to realize that there's this thing called podcasting out there. At first, I didn't know what it was. And when I figured out what it was, when I was given enough of an opportunity to explore it, I realized that, oh my goodness, this is a great tool, not only for me as a speaker trainer in business, but it's a great opportunity for anyone in business who's an entrepreneur, subject matter expert, doctor, lawyer, lender, land developer, any of those people who are wanting to be seen as the go-to expert. What a way to leverage. It's almost like writing a book, right? People don't write a book to become a best-selling author, like the next Stephen King. They write a book to elevate their credibility. At least they do in business, right? If they're a full-time author, yeah, okay, that's a little different. But they write a book to elevate their credibility, not to sell a bajillion copies of it. So I recognize that podcast is a way to do that. What I didn't realize was how many people didn't know about this podcasting thing. This is around 2019.
Right.
And then in 2020, this crazy thing happened across the entire world. Everything got shut down. Yeah. Everything got shut down, right? Overnight, we're shut down, we're locked down, we're in a global pandemic. And now I had to reinvent myself again because the radio station I was working at was reinventing themselves. So I had to figure out what am I going to do? So they unfortunately had to, there was a huge mass layoff of a number of individuals, but I took this as an opportunity to now go into full-time as an entrepreneur. The challenge was my business was speaker training, not podcasting. So I'm scratching my head going, well, now's the time to, instead of getting people on live stages, how do I get people on virtual stages? And a podcast just made sense, because I view a podcast as a virtual stage. It's still a stage, right? I mean, I'm on your stage right now, Munira. Thank you so much for inviting me on your stage. But that's what I was doing. I was training people and showing people how to launch their podcasts and getting them to that place. So it started with broadcasting, speaker training, a couple of opportunities that fell through. Great career, loved my career, and that's led me to where I am today.
That's an awesome trajectory of your life, right? But let's talk about podcasting. That's such a wonderful world. There are over, I want to say 4.7 million podcasts in different languages. Last time I checked was 4.7. And people all over the world are devouring this content. Now, if you are a podcaster, which you are, and I am, how do we get seen in the world? How do we get that stage? I mean, there's a lot of actors, but there are some that are like Keanu Reeves and, Denzel Washington, who captivate the stage. But then there are some people who are people who don't even show up, or they have a little tiny part in the movie. How then does podcast play this integral role in this vast universe?
Personally, I loved how you used the words devour. The little number of people out there devouring podcasts, because I believe that people who listen to podcasts on a regular basis, they are devouring them. They love them. That's why they keep going back and listening to them. And by the way, it's interesting to note some of the stats out there. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty, but I'll just share this one with you. 82% of individuals between the ages of 12, yes, there's content for kids. 82% of individuals between the ages of 12 and 54 are listening to and devouring, as Munira said, podcasts, right? So how do you cut through all that noise? That's a very good question, and it's a very valuable question to bring forward. Firstly, understand that of those 4.7 million podcasts, unfortunately, not all of them are active. There were a lot of people who came to the podcasting space during the pandemic. They might have been bored. They might have thought that they were shifting into something else, and then they stopped doing their podcast. We don't know the reasons for it, but we do know that there's about a 30 to 40% pod fade of hosts who come, start a show, and then 6 months or a year later stop doing their shows. By the way, that's something I'm trying to change, so people stick with it, realizing that it's a long game, not a short game. That aside, how do you cut through all that noise? Well, I want you to think of it this way. I want you to realize, again, if you go back to the fact that a podcast is a stage, a podcast is a stage, a podcast is a speaking opportunity. Imagine if you could stand in front of an audience once a week, so 52 times a year, and let's say that stage only had 50 people in the audience. If you paint the picture like that for people and you ask the question, would you turn that down? Most people will say what? No, I wouldn't turn that down at all. I would not turn that down. Understanding that the smaller audience is as valuable as those 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 person stages, maybe even more valuable, because when your show is attracting your core audience or your client avatar, your ideal client, the people who you know will eventually follow you, like you, trust you, and maybe do business with you, would you rather try and figure out who those people are in a sea of 50,000 people, or would you rather try and figure out those core people in a group of 50 people? So that's number one. Number two is, like anything, I'll give this example. And I'm trying to think. Is it how do you eat an orangutan, or how do you not an orangutan? How do you eat a whale or an elephant or whatever? It's one bite at a time, right? So when you launch your show, it's probably not going to be huge unless you already have some celebrity or notable status behind you. Oprah Winfrey, Tony Robbins, they launch a podcast. They have millions of followers already because of what they've done. If you don't, that's okay. This is your opportunity to build your audience as you're going along. So when I launched my podcast, my episodes used to get 15, 20 listens when I first launched. Now they're getting more like 500 to 1,000 listens every single time I publish an episode. But it started small, and now it's grown, and the show is growing. But then not only that, your credibility is growing as well. So recognizing that, it goes back to understanding that it's a long game, not a short game, number one. And if you position your content the right way, that you will be able to cut through some of that noise that's out there. So it goes back to positioning your messaging and your content so that people will listen. That's the biggest challenge I think people wrestle with, because I think they come to podcasting And I know this isn't you, Munira. I know you work very hard at what you do, but some people come to the space thinking all I have to do is talkie and people will listen to me. No, it doesn't work that way. You need to have a message. The audience is going to always ask, why should I be listening to what Carl is saying or what Munira is saying? So you always need to answer that why, and you always need to give people the value at the end. Listen to my next episode, come to my community, join me on my quest, whatever it is. And if you're not doing that, I don't want to say you're going to fail, but understand that we're creatures of habit and we're creatures of needing instructions to know what to do next. One of the things I learned in speaker training,
Right.
in order to let the audience know, it's kind of like when you're standing on a stage and you get to the end of your presentation. If you just say, thank you very much, have a good day. Well, what do you want the audience to do with your message? You need to continuously give them that next connecting piece. Buy my book, sign up for my program, let's have a coffee, let's chat in the in the rotunda, or whatever it is. It's the same thing with a podcast. And your messaging, it goes back to your messaging, your content. It needs to be clear. It needs to be fine-tuned to bring in the audience that you want.
These are amazing points. So what would you tell the audience that had thought about being on a podcast but haven't taken this stage?
Yeah, I would say, okay, so I would say, do it. I would say, do it. Just what is it that you want to share with people? If you haven't been on a podcast, if you haven't been a guest on a podcast, you haven't started a podcast, firstly, I'd say start with guesting. If you haven't been on a podcast, if you haven't started a podcast, start with guesting to get familiar and comfortable with what it is that a podcast is about and how you can provide value to that. Then once you're comfortable with sharing your content and having that information out there, and by the way, guesting is as valuable as having your own show because you're still elevating your expertise. Guesting is like, Munira, you've probably heard this many times, your local radio station has an expert on, or your national radio station has an expert on. Imagine listening to a podcast and you're the expert on that show. Munira invited me in as the expert to share with her and chat today. So think about it that way, but then also realize the value in the more you get the word out about what it is that you do and who you are as a person and the value that you're providing people in your space, the more people will want to follow you and learn more about you. That's number one. Number two, when you're ready, launch your own show. There's nothing better than if you have your own stage and are inviting people to it. Speakers do this all the time. I know speakers who have their own stages. Why? Because it's nice having your own stage, and invite people to it. Because it now, again, it takes your credibility to a completely different level. Is it work? Yes. Are there challenges along the way? Yes. But that's why you have somebody like Munira, who's in this space, and myself, who's in this space, to help you navigate through that. So I would say, do it. Do it, do it, do it. And don't hesitate, of course, to, if any questions after today, I'm more than happy to. I can talk about this all day long with people. So I'm always here to help people. And
you mentioned, one of the things you mentioned is that start guesting. And you know, I've had people say, why should I start guesting when I can start my own podcast? How do you answer that question?
Honestly, it's a personal preference. Some people look at the road to having their own show as being it's a journey. It takes, you know, anywhere from, if you do it correctly, when we work with clients, it takes anywhere from 60 to 90, sometimes even 120 days to launch a podcast. So even if you want to launch a podcast first, if it's going to take you 60 to 120 days to do it correctly and have everything ready, because it becomes a marketing machine unto itself, well, wouldn't it make sense that also while you're doing that, take that 2 to 4 months or whatever it is to also guest on other shows? So I would actually almost do them in tandem. If I were to go back to the beginning, 2018, when I was ramping up to launch my show, if I knew there was a smooth sailing way to guest on shows, I would have done that first. I'm not convinced there was back then. There are so many tools out there now for getting on shows. It's very, very easy to get on podcasts, easier than it was back then, I believe. But I would say that as you're getting that show ready to launch, and you can use that other people's stages, other people's podcasts, to say, hey, by the way, I'm launching my own podcast in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4. You can say that. You can use a platform like Munira's. I mean, Munira, you love podcasting. Use a platform like that to say, I'm joining the podcasting space. I'm so excited. So that's what I would say. If you're really, really, really convinced you want your own show, you don't want a guest, you want your own show, that's what you want. Never dismiss the power of guesting, by the way. But definitely then, that's what you go for. But understand there's a strategy to it. There's a methodology to doing it effectively, to launch those first. When we work with clients, we launch 10 episodes. We do a boatload of promotion leading up to it. We have everything all lined up and ready to go. So by the time you're getting to the launch pad to launch those 10 episodes, you're ready. You're ready not only to market your show, but you're ready to get the messaging out and start to build your audience. It's one of the things that people think is just magically happens, is that when you launch a podcast, all of a sudden the podcast gods or the podcast heavens will open and you'll have listeners. Didn't work that way for me. I wish it had, but it doesn't work that way. It works by doing a lot of things to organically get the word out that you have a show. But if you allow yourself the runway to do that, and by the way, I would never, ever, ever do it on my own. If this is for your business, if this is to elevate your brand and your credibility, hire an expert. I mean, hire me or hire somebody to help you along on that journey. Because if you don't, it's just like I attune it to fixing my own car. The reason I don't fix my car is if I did, I'd probably screw it up, and it would cost me more to have the mechanic repair it than it would be for me to try and tinker with it to try and fix it. Plus, I'm not very mechanically inclined that way, right? Same thing with the podcast. Get the expert to help you. Get the individual to give you the assistance you need to do it properly, so you will be it's just like coaching. I mean, it's the same thing in the coaching space. People say hire a coach because they'll take years off your journey in business or whatever it is, because they're helping you shorten point A to point B. It's really what they're doing. It's like same as without GPS. Remember the world without GPS?
Yes, we could just go and get lost.
Just go. You had to read a map to figure out where is this place. You drive around the block 6 times because you can't find it because no one's telling you you have arrived. So same thing. If you want to arrive more expeditiously, get the expert help to, make sure that you not only do it correctly, but that when you arrive, you're arriving and you're seen as the expert you want to be seen as.
Perfect. Now, Carl, where do people find you?
Oh, firstly, Munira, thanks so much for having me as your guest. I was so thrilled to have this opportunity. I can be found at podcastsolutionsmadesimple.com. You can also find me all over social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I'm all over there. And as I said, I'm more than happy. I love having conversations with people about podcasting. If you go to podcastsolutionsmadesimple.com, you'll find the link to our show. You'll find the links to also book a coffee with me and book a strategy session. So always happy to have those conversations. podcastsolutionsmadesimple.com.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. You have spoken to an expert who has taken his speaking career all the way from radios to podcasting. And it's a different kind of a radio show where it is available at your fingertips. You can go search for it. And if done correctly, people are able to find it where you can find your favorite podcast shows. And you know what? We don't have to listen to the millions of listeners out there. You listen to what resonates to you. So you pick and choose your channel, you pick and choose your podcast, you pick and choose your person who is talking to you. And if you like somebody, always go look for them and see where they've been a host at. You never know how that strategy can elevate your business. And if you're listening to this, take the first step. Go become a guest somewhere and see if you like it. Because I know I've been in business for almost 8 seasons now, 8 years now. Munira's Musings has been on there. And I was crazy, just, getting people to just come and talk to me, and didn't have a strategy, but just started. And now it's become a very fine, well-oiled machine where I just go in and it works on its own and life is good. So you never know what it's going to do for you, but this way you are able to take your business to the next level. And not only that, you might be having fun with it. You never know. So until next week, we'll come back with another guest, with another niche, with another perspective. Have fun, be a guest, and don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to our channel. Bye, everybody. Bye, Carl.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of The Niche Navigator. We hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. If you found value in today's episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. Your support really helps us keep bringing you amazing content. For more updates and behind-the-scenes glimpses, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and all our other social platforms. The links are in the description below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with you there. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next week.